What's up everybody, how's it going? It's Burke aka Dansgreat here and welcome back to another Final Fantasy X video. Over the last 10 years I have made hundreds of videos about Final Fantasy X. I have spent hours upon hours upon hours talking about how much I love the game, different ways in which I love the game, reasons why you should love the game, but Final Fantasy X is not perfect. I am willing to admit this, and in this video I'm going to talk about 5 things that I did not like about Final Fantasy X. So let's get straight into it. Some of the things I'm going to talk about in this video are going to be very obvious, stuff that everyone's going to agree with, and some of it is going to be slightly more personal, but I'm interested to see what your experiences have been with Final Fantasy X and what you think the flaws are of this game. So let me talk about 5 things I didn't like about Final Fantasy X. Final Fantasy X first came out in the year 2001, and there were different versions of the game available. There was the original Japanese version, there was the European PAL version, and there was the North American version. Nowadays that's not really an issue. Games are a lot more region free, or like you have a Japanese dub and you have an English dub and they have pretty much exactly the same features. But back in the day for Final Fantasy X, the people that were from the US that brought the North American version and that did not get to play the international version, the PAL version or the original Japanese version, really got shortchanged in terms of the amount of content they got for Final Fantasy X. So one of the things I disliked was how much they omitted from the North American version. Pretty sure they paid the same price for the game that people from Europe did, but they got a lot less content. So the most important thing that they missed out on was the inclusion of the Dark Aeons and Penance. So when you look at the post-game of Final Fantasy X, a lot of the things that you would do, even if you're not a trophy hunter, would be dedicated to taking on the Dark Aeons and defeating Penance. Because the Celestial weapons are the best weapons to face the Dark Aeons with, so that's motivation for you to go out and get them in the first place. But for the North American version, there was no Dark Aeons and there was no Penance available, which basically meant that the Monster Arena had the most challenging enemies in the game. Now that alone, for me, is a huge omission. Like if we think by today's standards, I think the Dark Aeons and Penance, considering how difficult they are relative to the rest of the enemies in the game, is basically like a DLC for me. So it's like bonus DLC content, significant DLC content that the North American version did not have. The Dark Aeons are already enough of a reason for me to put this on the list. But just in case you're curious, some other differences, abilities like Quick Pockets, Nab Gill, Pilfer Gill, Full Break, and the Ribbon Armor were also not in the North American version. Another thing that was omitted was the Expert Sphere Grid. So for people that wanted to play the game again and have much more options when it came to how they wanted their characters to proceed and the roles they wanted them to have, the North American version did not have the Expert Sphere Grid either. And also Omega Weapon in the Omega Ruins, because remember, the North American version already has a severe lack of super bosses. It only had 100,000 HP in the North American version, but 1 million HP in the PAL version and in the remasters. So yes, nowadays, because everyone's playing the remaster on the PS3, the PS4, Steam, PS Vita, etc., it's not a big deal anymore because they leveled the playing field with that. But between the years of like 2001 and 2013, unless you like went the extra mile to be able to play the international version on your North American PlayStation, you had to miss out on quite a lot of content, which I think was a pretty crappy deal for North American fans of the game. Okay, now I'm going to move on to something narrative and a lot more subjective. Every story is going to have its ups and downs. There's going to be moments that are going to be cheesy, there's going to be moments that don't always fully make sense, there's going to be bad dialogue, there's going to be bad writing, but in general Final Fantasy X, I absolutely love the story. I still think when you look at the big picture, it's one of the greatest stories told in gaming history, but that's just my personal opinion. But there are moments in the story which are undeniably quite silly, and one that's always stood out to me was the View Purification section, which I thought was a pretty cool concept, but it was horribly executed because, first things first, the fact that they split up your party into members that can swim and members that can't swim was completely stupid, because if your goal is to kill these guys in these dungeons, then why the hell would you split them up in a way where the swimmers can go into the underwater section and conveniently the ones that can't swim go into the section that's on land? Like, that's just ridiculous. So that was a terrible decision anyway. That completely like killed. Like, I know bad guys tend to make stupid decisions in video games and in narrative stories, that's just how it goes, but this one just seemed particularly stupid to me. And obviously we've got to add in the fact that why would you put an exit if you're trying to kill people in there? It's like, you know, they expect us to give up and die down there. It's a dungeon that's supposed to kill people, but there's an exit, and it's like, what if they make it to the exit? Well, why the hell would you put them somewhere where there's an exit? So that whole segment of the game where they get imprisoned and they're thrown into the View Purification, where they're supposed to give up and die in the dungeons, I just thought that was like just badly done. They could have been imprisoned, they could have been put into a dungeon, but they could have done it in a way that wouldn't have had those issues. So it's a little bit unfortunate. It wasn't one of the smartest decisions they made when writing this game. If you're expecting me to talk about Fireflies and talk about how they're like Deus Ex Machina, no. I've talked enough about Fireflies in this game, and yes, of course, they're responsible for supernatural phenomena, etc., but that's the way the world's been constructed, and I think Fireflies and the way they're used is pretty consistent. For Final Fantasy X at least. It does get a bit more mushy when you head towards the end of Final Fantasy X too, but within the context of Final Fantasy X and how things work in there, everything from like what happens to the Fireflies in the water, to how people turn into fiends, and the spheres and all the unsent, etc. Yes, they're pretty crazy ideas, but Fireflies have never bothered me in terms of them being a narrative device and a world-building device for Final Fantasy X. Let's move on to the next one. This is something that caught my attention in the PS2 version and should have kind of not really existed as much for the remaster, but it still kind of does, which was quite interesting to me. So, of course, in Final Fantasy X we have the in-game versions and we have the FMV versions, so the ones that are in the pre-rendered high-quality like movie scenes. Now, for some reason, most of the characters look the same in the gameplay as they do in the FMV. It's quite clear. Tidus is really different. So the Tidus in the gameplay looks much more Americanized and lighter skinned, but he becomes more Asian and dark skinned in the FMVs. And for some reason, like compared to the others, he has a really noticeable difference compared to them. And I've never really understood why. And I don't know if there's like some kind of official explanation on this. I've not really found one before. But it always struck me as a bit strange, where like Auron basically looks the same, Lulu basically looks the same, Waka, Kimahri, etc. But Tidus and also Riku, who looks more Asian in the FMVs, those two kind of stand out. So Riku looks more Asian, but she's still quite fair-skinned. But Tidus becomes a lot more tanned-looking and Asian in the FMVs than he does in the gameplay. But I just never understood why that was inconsistent like that. Like, just pick one and have Tidus look like that for both of them, as you have for all of the other characters. So that was a little bit strange to me. This also leads into the remaster, which annoyed me with like the character updates, because once again we had characters that I thought looked fantastic, like, you know, again Auron, Lulu, Kimahri, Waka, they all looked good. Now Yuna, for some reason, the remaster I think looked bad. Like, she was one of the worst ones. And Tidus again with those weird like super blue googly eye looking eyes. I have no idea why they made him like that either. So in terms of the character design, I think there were issues both with the original PS2 version, and they had a chance to correct it in the remaster, and they still got some things wrong about it, which I've never really understood, to be honest, because it doesn't seem that difficult. And at the end of the day, it's the main protagonist of the game. You've got Tidus inconsistent in the PS2 version, and he's still inconsistent, and he wasn't really remastered very well for the remaster. So it's a bit of a strange creative choice / error they made with Tidus's design, and Riku in the PS2 version, and Yuna in the remaster. Next up, we have dialogue pacing. So some of you guys might not know, but they recorded the Japanese dub of the entire game, and they lip-synced according to the Japanese dub. And when they sent it over to the English dub, basically the English lines had to fit inside the same time slot as the Japanese ones. For this reason, we had some silly moments like when Tidus has to say, "with Yuna by my side," but because that line's too long compared to the Japanese version, he has to say,
"I wanted to see Yuna's statue too, but I wanted to see it with Yuna by my side."
So yes, this is clearly like silly and a mistake. I don't know why they didn't just say "beside Yuna" or something like that. I'm sure there's a shorter string of text that could have been read with a normal pace and that would have fit in there. So the pacing was something that was noticeable at times, and the game suffered for it. But I'm not going to criticize the game too harshly for it, because I know the circumstances under which it happened, but I feel like there could have been some more elegant solutions to it, and it didn't have to end up with lines like "with Yuna by my side," for example. So that's another thing that I wasn't too hot on when it came to Final Fantasy X. We come to the final and worst thing about Final Fantasy X. This is utterly utterly unforgivable, if you ask me. For all my love of the game, and for the amount of times I've played the game from start to finish, the sheer amount of hours I have poured into this game over the last 14 years, I cannot forgive Square Enix for not allowing the skipping of cutscenes. Like, come on, what were you thinking? You cannot have a game that has, like, I would say, I think about at least 7 to 8 hours of raw cutscene, probably a little bit more, 7 to 8 hours at least of raw cutscene that you have to sit down and watch, that you cannot skip in any kind of way. It's most noticeable when you have to fight a boss repeatedly. So try fighting Unalesca 10 times in a row, and having to watch that scene, all you're doing is killing the emotional significance of your own scenes, because the scene before Unalesca is one of the most epic moments of the entire game, as we all know, as we all love. But if you're having to watch that 10 times, 15 times, 20 times, however long it might take you, you might be really struggling with Unalesca. That can really kill the vibe, the fact that you have to watch that scene so many times. The same can be said of the final boss battle against Jekt. The build up to that scene is really long. These are 2 difficult boss battles. Seymour Flux is another, so those 3 alone is enough to give people nightmares, because it just wastes so much time and it's so unnecessary. Maybe in the worst way, you could have had a situation where once you complete the game the first time, you unlock the option to skip cutscenes on a second playthrough or something like that. It feels like something that is just so easy to implement, and they've had so many chances to do it, but they just refuse to allow you to skip the cutscenes, which I find absolutely unforgivable. There is no reason why we shouldn't be able to skip cutscenes in this game. Thankfully, if you're on the Steam version, there's a mod for it, but for console people and people playing on the Vita, tough luck. You're just going to have to deal with it. So there we go, guys. That's 5 things I did not like about Final Fantasy X. I want to see what you guys have to add to the list as well, because 5 things is of course not exhaustive for Final Fantasy X, but I wanted to cap it at 5 because, well, it's my favourite game of all time. I don't want to get too nitpicky and too harsh on it, but I did want to try and be as objective as I could and tell you guys some things that didn't make me happy about this game. So there we go, guys. I look forward to seeing your opinions in the comments as well. Thanks for watching. Take care.